Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. On behalf of Central Bank Studies, I extend a warm welcome to all of you to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka for the public seminar on effective implementation of green finance standards and policies. This seminar is organized as part of the 75th anniversary celebrations of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, a milestone that marks our continued commitment and evolving with the times and addressing emerging challenges. As the central bank actively works towards the implementation of green finance initiatives, we believe this seminar will serve as a valuable platform for knowledge sharing and dialogue. The insights that will be shared today will undoubtedly benefit central bankers, policymakers, and professionals from financial and other institutions as we collectively strive to embed sustainability into the heart of our financial system. Thank you for your presence and your keen interest in this area of development at this critical juncture in time. Moving forward with the first item on our agenda, I now have the honor of inviting the Governor of Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Dr. Nandalal Weerasinghe, to introduce our distinguished speaker to the audience.
Good morning, everyone, board members, senior deputy governor, assistant governors, and invitees, participants, especially Dr. Ma. So, first of all, we in fact are truly honored to host today's public lecture on the effective implementation of green finance standards and policies. The subject of immense relevance and urgency as we collectively strive to align our finance systems with global sustainability agenda. I think we have been very active in this area. As you can remember, we have done a lot of other things as well. We use this opportunity, Dr. Ma is here, so we use this opportunity to have a conversation and share his views, especially on the effective implementation. The successful implementation of green finance standards and policies helps unlock sustainable economic growth. It also strengthens resilience and ensures that financial flows are consistent with our environmental goals and to address any climate issues. It's indeed a privilege and a pleasure to welcome our distinguished speaker, Dr. Ma Jun, a globally renowned expert in green and sustainable finance. Dr. Ma currently serves as the chairman and president of the Hong Kong Green Finance Association, chairman of the Capacity Building Alliance of Sustainable Investment, and the president of the Institute of Finance and Sustainability in Beijing. Very active in his institute, both in Beijing and Hong Kong. He also co-chairs the Taxonomy Working Group of the International Platform for Sustainable Finance and has previously served in key roles at the People's Bank of China. He's obviously a central banker. And also the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, Deutsche Bank, the World Bank, and the IMF. He has both central banking as well as multilateral agencies and G20 as well. Very wide, broad exposure. Dr. Ma is also no stranger to the central bank. In fact, we are deeply grateful for the support that you have extended throughout our sustainable finance journey. He has been working with us and helping us. He provided valuable guidance as an advisor to the development of Sri Lanka's green finance taxonomy and also the sustainable finance roadmap 2.0 that we recently launched, while also contributing meaningfully to our capacity building initiatives in this area. On behalf of the central bank and all stakeholders, without taking much time, I would like to express our sincere appreciation for his continued commitment and collaboration. We are especially thankful for Dr. Ma for conducting this lecture amidst his demanding schedule for within these 3 days he is going to be here. So then let me invite Dr. Ma to deliver your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Governor, for the very kind introduction, and it's my great honor and pleasure to be here speaking to the great audience on the subject of green finance. And really appreciate the collaboration. I was given the opportunity by the Sri Lanka Central Bank last few years, working together with a team on taxonomy. In fact, I was the person leading the designed our first taxonomy in China back 10 years ago. Then I co-chaired the Chinese-European-led Common Ground Taxonomy, which should now become the basis for the Sri Lanka taxonomy. And I'm very glad to see, actually, when you published that, you said you referenced the Common Ground Taxonomy, which is part of work of the international collaboration. And now for today, I guess I was given 15 minutes for an opening remark. Then we will engage in a conversation on how green finance can be applied to many other jurisdictions, including Sri Lanka, in a more effective way. I'd like to focus on a few things. One is the China experience of developing the green finance framework, including how we were thinking about effectively using the taxonomy. And then some of the issues on the global scale, largely because I was the co-chair of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group for many years. And during that process, I was able to observe many different countries' pathway towards greening the financial system, some successful, some less. And a lot of lessons we can learn probably from this international perspective. So starting with China, back 11 years ago when I joined the PBOC as chief economist, I began to form a task force on green finance. And that time, the origin of the Chinese green finance was not so much of a climate, it's really pollution. If I'm not sure any of you were in China 10 years ago, if you were there, you probably remember the Chinese were wearing masks, and especially in northern part of China in Beijing. And we wear masks not because of COVID, but because of air pollution. And air pollution was as bad as in one day in Beijing, 2013, the PM2.5 index, which is the density of air pollutants in each cubic square meter of air, is 1,000, relative to the WHO standard of 25. So it's many, many, many times of the safe level for Beijing. And that was really the trigger for so much of public opinion pushing the government to deal with air pollution. You have to spend a lot of money fixing, for example, coal-fired power generation, which is a big emitter, fixing the transportation, too many cars, using fossil fuel, and a lot of families, burning coal for heating. All of these things need to be fixed. And how do we fix that? We have to spend money putting out all these projects in dealing with air pollution. Then at the same time, we had a big problem of water pollution and also land contamination. So overall, the government was estimating that we needed something like 2 trillion to 4 trillion RMB every year to fix pollution. And my team, which is in the central bank studying green finance, saying that we can actually mobilize the 2 to 4 trillion for you, because you don't have money. The central fiscal authority can only come up with 10% of the amount they need. And 90% of the money for fixing pollution needs to be mobilized by financial system and need to be led by the central bank. So that was a click between the central government looking for money and the central bank working group on green finance say, we can mobilize it for you. And very quickly, I think our task force proposal was accepted within 3 to 4 months by the central authority. Then they put into an overarching framework called Eco-Civilization Plan, which is similar to Green Development Plan, Sustainable Development Plan. And there's one chapter which I wrote called Establishing Green Financial System, with 13 options or 13 policy proposals. And all of these were coming from the task force, which we formed in the central bank. So having this high-level consensus, which is actually signed off by our president, it's much easier for our job in the central bank to begin to push for more concrete and technical level of implementation for green finance. So the second year, namely 2015, the central government, based on the big eco-civilization plan, asked the central bank to form a consortium with other 6 ministries, and saying, you guys, the 7 ministries, should design a green finance policy guideline. And I was actually leading the task force of the 7 ministries, and we spent 1 year designing the guideline with 35 policy measures. And that came out in 2016, which is the first sort of top-down green finance policy guideline in the world. I know that in a lot of OECD countries, they developed the green finance products a long, long time ago, 20, some even 30 years ago. But what they were doing is bottoms-up approach. Namely, their financial investors, like insurance company, pension funds, believe that they are long-term investors. They need to have a long-term instruments like green bonds and so on to be invested in. That was a private sector-led initiative. But in China, we were the first in 2015-16 to put a top-down approach with 35 policy measures into one document, which is called the Green Finance Guideline. And that worked because okay, so I was giving more time. Because in developing countries, including China, I think the capacity at the private sector level, private sector is actually relatively low. It's very hard to rely on private sector to initiate all of these and put together ecosystem. While the government has awareness and has probably the convening power to put together all these different resources on policy level, on capacity level, and on products level. And also one feature in China is that many of the large financial institutions are state-owned. And we as a central bank, as a regulator, we essentially can tell them to do things rather than begging them to do things. And that's why the central bank in leading the consortium of the 7 ministries, driving green finance is very, very appropriate. So that was the beginning of the Chinese green financial system. So after now it's like 9 years of implementation because the formal guideline was out in 2016, now it's 2025. And China has developed the largest green lending market in the world. Now our outstanding green loans is 40 trillion RMB, which is about 5.5 trillion US dollar. And our green bond market also become the largest. We have outstanding amount 2.2 trillion RMB. And what do these financial instruments do to the real economy? We actually massively grew our green economy in the past 6, 7, 8 years. And just give you a few numbers, the renewable energy installation in China is now 50% of the global installation. And our EV industry, the electric vehicle, is about 50% of the global total in terms of production and sales. And our batteries, which is feeding into the electric vehicle industry and also the renewable industry in order to stabilize the supply to the grids, is about 70% of global total. And all these major green industries are very, very capital intensive, which means that they need access to money and they need to access to cheap money. And that's what we do in the financial system by providing them cheaper, accessible, and greener financing. So indeed, we have proven that the green finance can drive the real economy. And this used to be a big point for debate between many different countries when I was co-chairing the G20 discussion. A lot of countries are afraid that, hey, if you do green, and you probably will depress the economy because a lot of non-green things cannot be done, and you will lose job, you will end up with poverty. That's not true. In China, we have shown that the green economy can be a major driver for economic growth, can be a major creator for jobs, and can help you to enhance your competitiveness in the global market. So greening of the financial system and speeding up economic activity and job creation can go hand in hand. They are consistent rather than contradictory. So that was sort of a brief introduction of the origin of the Chinese green financial system. Of course, the last few years we shifted our focus away from pollution control because pollution came down so much the last 10 years. Air pollution came down 70%. And the average number, sort of annual average of PM 2.5 in Beijing has come down to the international acceptable level of 30-something from 90 plus. The 1,000 number I mentioned is a single day sort of a number. And that's why pollution control become a lesser priority in the green finance field. And now 67% of our green financing goes to carbon reduction, which is fighting climate change. And I think we'll be allocating more of our green finance towards climate-related activities going forward. Now, maybe we can show a couple of slides in what I call 4 pillars of the Chinese green financial system and say a few words on how we actually solve for effective implementation of the few pillars. let me go down to here. This is a very, very lengthy PowerPoint. If you need it, it's 135 page. We will send it to you later, but I'm picking a few of them. And just to show you, the pillar 1, which is, I think, most important for any economy to start the green financial system, is to have an official definition of the green activities that green finance should support, which we call taxonomy. Taxonomy is just like a big table. We list all these activities, for example, solar, wind, biomass, water treatment, solid waste treatment, all these environmentally friendly projects, and also projects can reduce carbon. But of course, you may want to talk about adaptation as well, which is important for this part of the region. And initially, our taxonomy, for example, the 2015 version, which I led in drafting, is a short one. It's only 10 pages, right, with 30-something items. And now, over time, we expanded. The latest version is like 250 items in a long document of 60 pages. That's the taxonomy. Now, let me spend some time on effective implementation or usage of taxonomy, which I actually spoke to the governor just a few minutes ago. My view is that globally there are many, many countries introduced taxonomy. I think 40 plus have taxonomy already, and more are actually establishing their taxonomy. But not many countries have used them effectively. Many of these taxonomy, as I've seen from other developing countries, are just sitting there on the website of a central bank. And they're too soft. The regulators are not telling the potential users to use them on a mandatory basis. And they are begging the user, for example, the banks and corporates, hey, can you please use it? I don't think this is effective because most of these market players, whether they're bank or other investors or corporates, they are short-sighted, meaning that if you want me to incur additional cost to do the labeling using your taxonomy and to report to the central bank and general public, I don't want to incur the additional cost. And don't make trouble for me. That's why if you do a survey, say, hey, are you willing to use a taxonomy to do things? They say, no. But there are macro benefits of using that. And as a central bank, as a government regulator, you need to see the benefits, the macro benefits, and need to enforce them in an aggressive way. So afterwards, you will see this is actually very useful for the entire country to grow green finance much faster than otherwise. Then in a situation where you don't use it on a mandatory basis. Now, a couple of usage that we have developed in China, all of these are in a mandatory way. One is that once we publish the taxonomy, we tell the banks and also the users in the corporate sector, which are the corporates issuing green bonds and also borrowing green loans, you have to use it to label your financial products. Meaning a bank lends a green loan to a corporate, then you have to follow my taxonomy and you have to report to me as a central bank that you have used this taxonomy and you have presented the documentation to support that your loan is consistent with the taxonomy. And then the commercial bank will report to the central bank saying, this month I have done this many of green loans and total dollar amount is this much. And then I report it, level by level from actually the commercial bank to the provincial, initially to the city level central bank branch. Then the city level central bank branch, you report to the provincial level central bank branch. Then the provincial level central bank branch will report to the national level of the central bank. And the central bank will consolidate to the number, periodically on how much green loans have been extended. So there are two things that are used on the management. One is that for each green loan, you have to use the taxonomy rather than using any other standards or imagined labeling practice. And secondly, you have to report. And now once you do the reporting, which is actually in two ways. One is report the total dollar amount of green loans to the central bank, and the other one is report the environmental benefits, meaning that for each loan, you have to deliver some environmental benefit in the form of reducing air pollution, reducing water pollution, reducing carbon emission, and reducing energy consumption. Tell me the amount, right? For example, how many tons carbon you have reduced, how many tons of co-equivalent of energy consumption you have reduced. And these numbers need to be based on taxonomy, because taxonomy provides a boundary for the total amount of loan, and the total amount of loan has association with the amount of emissions that's being reduced. So tell me these numbers in your report to the central bank. And once the central bank gets these numbers, it has a very important incentive to provide, which is I can rank the green performance of all the financial institutions. For example, China has 4,000 banks, and we rank periodically the green loan ratio of each bank. Say, on average, in fact, China now is like 14% green loan ratio, meaning the total outstanding green loans is 14% of entire banking loan portfolio. And some banks are doing better. They probably have 35% green loan ratio. And some banks are doing worse. It's maybe only 5%. So from 5% to 35%, I rank the 4,000 banks. And it's not complete public information. In fact, each bank knows the number. Yeah, if I'm the best guy, I know I'm the best. I'm informed by the central bank. If I'm one of the worst, I know I'm one of the worst. And that number and the comparison itself gives a big incentive for these banks to perform better. And the boss of the bank, namely the chairman and the board, will feel very ashamed if their number is so low. Then they become very nervous and saying, why we're doing so bad. And this department, the green loan department, you guys are not doing a job, right? I need to change, this department head. That kind of incentive, it doesn't cost you any penny, yeah, zero monetary spending, but it's very important in incentivizing the banks to do better. And also, because recently we began to implement ISSB, which is the International Sustainability Standard Board reporting requirement for the banks. And the banks now began to actually report publicly, not just to the central bank, my green loan ratio and my environmental benefits. Then instead of just central bank monitoring the performance or comparison, and the general public is also monitoring, if the whole population knows that this bank is doing the best, this bank is doing the worst, then it becomes another very important incentive for them to perform better and drive more resources towards the green performance. And the other usage of the taxonomy is actually the central bank and also governments allocating monetary incentive to banks and the corporates which are doing better on green. For example, the Chinese central bank, namely the PBOC, has offered a decarbonization facility, which is a re-lending facility, what we call. The central bank can lend money to the commercial bank, and the commercial bank will lend to the project owner for qualified green projects based on taxonomy. And these qualified projects, including renewable energy, including industrial energy efficiency projects, CCUS, and so on, and it's based on taxonomy. It's part of taxonomy, not an anti-taxonomy. And if this company has a qualified project, it goes to a commercial bank saying, I want to use the central bank decarbonization facility, which is much cheaper in terms of funding costs. It's only 1.75% annual interest rate. Then this company can enjoy the low-cost funding provided by the central bank. And the other way of providing incentive is some local governments in China, they are the pilot cities of green finance, and they say, I will come up with my own money, subsidizing the qualified green projects based on taxonomy. And if you are qualified projects, I will give you 50 basis points subsidy for interest payments. So if the original interest payment is 5%, you only need to pay 4.5, and the other 0.5 is paid by the local government. These are seemingly very small incentive, right? 50 basis points, but it can leverage the entire 100%, the principal lending. It's a 200 times leveraging. So it's a very, very smart way of using a small amount of government money to crowding the private sector money for green financing. And indeed, in one place, which is called Huzhou City, that's the first green finance pilot city in China, and they were able to grow their green loans at 40% every year in the last 7 years, largely because they introduced incentive like the interest subsidy. And other places are still doing well. For example, average of the Chinese green loan growth is probably 20% every year, last 7, 8 years, which is much faster than overall loan growth of 10%, sometimes lower than 10. But Huzhou is able to grow 4 times of the sort of national average loan growth. And now Huzhou's loan ratio is 34% for the entire city's banking system. And other emerging market average is about 3%, according to the numbers that's available. So Huzhou, being a pilot city and able to introduce a local incentive, they're 10 times greener than the other emerging markets, which doesn't have much of an incentive. And incentive, as I said, has to be based on taxonomy. Yeah. So these are a couple of usage of the taxonomy, which I'm hoping many countries can think about how to apply these methodologies. Now, let me go down to the other pillar, which is called disclosure. Now, initially, in the first few years in China, when we set up the green financial system about 10 years ago, we were focusing on the project level disclosure, which I think is very useful. Because we want to make sure that each project, whether it's water treatment or solid waste treatment, or it's renewable energy or electric vehicle, you need to demonstrate that you are indeed benefiting the environment and telling the lender, which is the bank, and then the bank will tell the central bank, you indeed have delivered these environmental benefits. That's a part of disclosure which we mandatorily require. We don't say, hey, you up to you. Yeah, you have to do it. This is very important to prevent greenwashing. If it's voluntary, there will be a lot of greenwashing. Yeah. And also, in terms of greenwashing prevention, we actually, in fact, put into what I call the ecosystem. We start with taxonomy. You have to label your green loans and calculate the green benefits according to our methodology, based on the taxonomy and the methodology formula provided by regulator. You don't randomly pick your methodology formulas. Yeah, so that's the required usage of taxonomy and related formula. Secondly, you have to report environmental benefits to regulator. For green bonds, you have to report to the markets public information. And thirdly, we ask the verifiers to verify those green bond issuers' claim on environmental benefits. We don't fully trust you. Sometimes you may want to fake your numbers, but we ask the verifiers. In 2016, when we initiated the green bond market, we grew from 0 to 13 verifiers. The verifiers found it's interesting market to make money, and then everybody wanted to be a verifier. Then we end up with a problem of too many verifiers, and the verifiers began to compete for business, right? And they say, I can offer you a verification service at a very, very low cost. When they compete too much and the cost going down, they charge very little, then they cannot deliver the quality work. Because the fee they charge cannot even cover their travel cost, right? They don't go to the site, they don't verify the numbers, and they just randomly put some okay kind of verification. That's very bad. So after that experience, we put into a mechanism to verify the verifiers. We want to make sure the verifiers actually do their job. How do we do that? In the central bank, we create a committee. It's called Green Bond Committee. And we ask all the verifiers coming, and you guys join the committee. And we ask you to develop a methodology to be self-disciplined, meaning don't over-compete on pricing. And if some of them have bad reputation of doing bad quality verification, then you're essentially kicked out by this community. So this community came up with the standards on you have to provide such information, 1, 2, 3, 4 items. You have to conclude with a standardized template stating your conclusion. For example, instead of randomly say yes or no, or give you a score 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or A, B, C, D, E, you have to do in this way. There are only 4 answers of something like a passage, average, excellent, and something else. Consistent sort of a description of the outcome. And the basic information, 1, 2, 3, 4, have to be there. And then we rank their performance by market reaction. If your market reaction, market appraisal is too low, then these verifiers will be downgraded to category B, which will not be allowed to perform the duty business on a standalone basis. You have to work with a category A verifier. So by downgrading them, essentially kicking them out. Yeah. So that become a discipline to make sure that they need to provide a quality verification instead of faking the number together with the issuers. So these are some of the experience that we developed in the 10 years of delivering the quality disclosure and try to minimize the risk of greenwashing. But as I said, more recently, we began to move towards ISSB-based disclosure, which is also important. The ISSB-based disclosure is more on the corporate, on the entity side, rather than a project level. The project level disclosure, which I described, was done on a mandatory basis. On the corporate level, meaning for entire company, you have to disclose your carbon information, your transition plan, your risk analysis results, and so on. This is something we are unfolding right now, but I think it will take some time. And for countries that's beginning to develop green financial system, I think it's actually more important to make sure your project level disclosure is done properly and can prevent greenwashing. Now, the third pillar is what I actually described briefly. We need some incentives. The reason we need incentive is that a lot of green projects in the early stage, they are not very profitable, and they're unable to attract enough of private sector participation. And that's why at the government level, we actually decided that the incentive is necessary in the very beginning, in 2016 at the Eco-Civilization National Plan level, that basically the president said that we need to have incentive. All guys in the government, whether it's central bank or the Minister of Finance or others, you have to think about some incentive to really induce the private sector to participate in green projects. By inducing, I'm essentially saying that enhancing their expected return. For example, a typical green project in the early stage may only deliver 4% of investment return, while private sector money provided, which is the insurance company, say I need at least a minimum 5% return. So how do we close the gap? We can close the gap by, for example, central bank providing cheaper money, lowering your funding cost, or local governments providing interest subsidies, again, lowering your funding cost. Or the local governments can say, hey, we will create a green industrial park, and they will allow the company, originally dirty company, polluting company to move in. And that right for you to move into industrial park is another incentive. Yeah, essentially, I'm building the water treatment facility for you for free. And now, a lot of local governments in China say, I'm building net zero industrial park, meaning the emission in the industrial park in terms of carbon is close to zero. Why? Because I'm building green power for you. Yeah, you don't have to build your own power plants, and I'm building the green power plants for you. Once you move in, you got green power already. That's becoming another incentive. So every ministry, every local governments are thinking about something to helping the companies, the green companies or transition companies, to lower their funding cost, lower other costs, and therefore enhancing their return. By doing so, we're able to crowd in a lot more private money than otherwise. So that's what we call the incentives. And now, in terms of products, as I said earlier, we have developed, these are the big category of green financial products in China. That's what I call Pillar 4. The reason we need so many different products is that the different green economic activities, they require different type of services. For example, green loans now is the biggest part of the Chinese green financial system. They can meet the regular demand for short-term, medium-term financing requirements. But most of the loans have an average of maturity like 2 to 3 years because of mismatch maturity risk. They cannot extend too much of very, very long-term loans. Then it becomes a problem for some of the green projects. For example, we have high-speed rail, and we have subway projects. We have some of the water treatment projects, which requires long-term financing because they're only able to repay the full principal in 10, 15, even longer time. If you can only get 2-year loan, it's very risky. After 2 years, can you refinance? If you cannot refinance, you end up with trouble, right? So we created this green bond market, which allows the issuers to issue green bonds with a maturity of 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, 20 years, matching their project maturity cycle. And we also created like 1,000 equity funds, which are helping many of these green project owners to actually raise equity money so that they can leverage in the debt market. And interestingly, the green insurance also being developed in a fairly aggressive way in China, because in some areas, the financial service requirement is actually not financing. It's for somebody else to help me as a company to manage risks. Now, I'll give you two examples. One is you are a solar company. You produce solar power. And on average, a solar power company can produce power probably 1,500 hours per year. And that's sort of the average. But sometimes I have better sunshine, right, in the year. I can produce 2,000 hours. I make a lot of money. And sometimes, the weather is no good for the whole year. I can only make, 1,000 hours. Then I lose money. If I have, a couple of years of bad weather, then the company, cannot perform, because this year I'm money making, that year I'm losing money. Then in the bad year, I may not be able to repay my loans to the banks. And the banks will be reluctant to lend to me for the solar project because of unstable, weather. So what do I do with that? And then we come up with a solution of green insurance. The largest insurance company in China, called PICC, say, hey, I can guarantee that these solar companies, maybe 100, every company will deliver at least 1,500 hours of, power sales. If you fall below that, I will subsidize you. Yeah. This is a big data theory, right? If I'm an insurance company, all the 100 power company, they buy my insurance, I can cover the risk. That, on a probability basis, the insurance company still make money. So having this insurance, the power company will not be afraid of, not having enough, hours of power generation. And then they will be able to go to the bank, say, hey, I can guarantee 1,500 hours of power supply and making this amount of money and making sure that I can repay your loan. Then the banks will be very happy to lend to you. So it's a combination of green insurance and lending that makes the project feasible and financeable. Another example of green insurance is that in the green building sector, a lot of developers in China, they're trying to develop a so-called green building, which is more energy efficient. For example, the green developers say, my building can save power by 40% compared with the regular building. Now, the problem of this developer is that the buyer of these properties do not trust the developer's claim. What if you sold the building to me, and after moving, I cannot enjoy the 40% reduction, right? You only have 10%, 20%. I'm being cheated by you. So for fear of not delivering the green credential, the green buildings, find it very hard to sell. So how do we solve the problem? We don't need a government subsidy. We just need an insurance company. The insurance company comes saying, hey, I deal with, these good green developers, and I done my due diligence with them, and I find these guys are credible. They must deliver 40% energy saving for you. If they don't, I'll pay you as a customer, as a buyer. Of course, I'm going to charge a little bit premium of the developer. So developer buys a green building insurance, and the developer get assurance that they definitely will deliver 40% of energy reduction. Otherwise, the insurance company will pay my customer. That's how the building can be sold. With that promise, the building can be sold, and then the building developer will be able to access the loans from the banks. So these are the sort of combination of green financial products that we need to sort of consolidate into one package to enable the development of industry, such as the renewable, such as the green building industry. And sometimes these things need to be facilitated by the government. For example, in Huzhou pilot city, I was actually involved in helping them to get a central bank and get the Ministry of Construction and the local governments to put together a green building insurance package. And the government subsidized the insurance premium a little bit so that the building developers will be able to access the green insurance at a cheaper cost than otherwise. So that's my sort of part one. Now let me move on to a quick introduction of the international initiatives which I personally been involved. For example, the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group, which started in 2016. And that year was a year where China was the presidency of the G20. So we had the opportunity to set agenda And as the chief economist in charge of green finance in the PBOC, I initiated this idea of creating a G20 green finance study group to form a global consensus on developing green finance. And year one, we end up with very good results. All the 20 members of the G20 came to agree that we need to do a lot of things to scale up green finance globally. And this is our Chinese president, Mr. Xi. He's talking about green finance at the summit of the G20. And the G20 Green Finance Study Group of 2016 came up with a whole bunch of, I think, 7 options on developing green finance globally, including greening the loan market, developing the green bond market, and conducting climate environmental risk analysis, and measuring progress, which is really about taxonomy. We need to have a taxonomy so that we can collect statistics on how much green loans, green bonds are being extended, and then measuring and comparing the performance. So many of these ideas, they gradually became initiative of other international organizations. For example, the risk analysis part later on became NGFS. Main mandate, the NGFS, which is the central bank network of greening financial system, they took on the task of designing the scenarios for climate risk analysis, and measuring progress, which initiated the idea of developing and harmonizing the taxonomy for measurement, evolved into the China-European-led Common Ground Taxonomy. Now, let me just say a couple words on the Common Ground Taxonomy, which I think has a potential to become a global benchmark for taxonomy development. Now, the idea is that at that time, about 5 years ago, China had a taxonomy already, and Europe was about to launch its taxonomy. And I feel that the European taxonomy must be different from the Chinese taxonomy. Then it will create a problem because the Chinese issuing green bond in the Chinese market will not be able to sell the green bond to the European investors. Because European investors say, hey, your green is not my green. And even though they may be the same, but I'm not convinced, right? Nobody tell me that your green solar is my green solar. And that's why I refuse to buy your green financial products. That become a reason for market segmentation. Now, just imagine if we have 190 countries and we end up with 190 different taxonomies. Then market segmentation will become a major problem. And the other problem is that if you indeed want to sell your financial products, green finance products in other markets, you have to do lots of verification against a different taxonomy. Then we incur additional costs. And finally, if there are too many taxonomies, some are public, some are private, then it may actually increase the risk of greenwashing. Someone will pick the weaker criteria to label my activity, saying, hey, I'm green. Yeah. So all these problems are potential problems at that time. It's not very real, but now we're actually seeing it's becoming more real because the 40 taxonomies available. We may end up with hundreds of taxonomy in the future. That's why 5 years ago, I came up with the idea of working together with Europe, because China and Europe are the 2 largest green finance markets. If we can agree on something that's called Common Ground Taxonomy, we may be able to bridge the global taxonomy community into something that's based on the same benchmark. And so that idea was discussed in 2019, and we formed a IPSF working group on taxonomy, which is called International Platform for Small Finance. That was initiated by EU and China, and other countries joined. But under that IPSF, we formed a taxonomy working group, which I co-chaired on behalf of China, and Marcel Hug from EU DG FISMA co-chaired on behalf of Europe. And 2 years later, 2022, we came up with the Common Ground Taxonomy that's agreed both by China and Europe. And this Common Ground Taxonomy, in my word, is that look at the Chinese taxonomy, we got a few hundred items. The European taxonomy, a few hundred items. Let's put together the overlapping portion is a Common Ground Taxonomy. Now, although in principle it's very simple, but the reality is that it took us 2 years to do the comparison because each taxonomy is written in their own way of classification. We have to reclassify the Chinese taxonomy into ISIC, which is the United Nations taxonomy, United Nations classification, and also convert the European into the ISIC. Then we began to compare. The reclassification itself consumed us like 9 months. Then the comparison, we end up with 6 different scenarios, and 4 of them are comparable, the other 4 of them are not comparable. Then we leave the not comparable out, and in the comparable activities, we end up with 72 items, which are both agreed by China and Europe. And these are the most usual suspects, like solar, wind, biomass, energy storage, water treatment, solid waste treatment, low carbon transportation, low carbon buildings, and so on and so forth. So indeed, the activities contained in the Common Ground Taxonomy represent about 70% of Chinese taxonomy already, and in some cases, maybe 80%. So a large part of the Chinese taxonomy, in fact, is consistent with Europe, and they are in the Common Ground Taxonomy, which means that if you issue a Chinese green bond in international market using Common Ground Taxonomy, it's actually very much in line with the Chinese taxonomy anyway, but at the same time, it could be recognized by international investors, especially Europeans, much more easily and with a lower cost of recognition than otherwise. So last year, we have one more important progress on the Common Ground Taxonomy, which is Singapore joined. And they said that we want to be part of the Common Ground Taxonomy, and can we be jointly developing the next version of the Common Ground Taxonomy. So they asked me as a China co-chair, they asked Marcel Hager, we said yes. Then they joined, and the 3 parties, namely China, Europe, and Singapore, developed this called Multi-Jurisdiction Common Ground Taxonomy, MCGT. And we published this MCGT in November 2024. And this MCGT is bigger in terms of the number of activities. It's now 111 items, including most of the climate mitigation and a little bit of other items, including environment and adaptation projects. And the actual usage of the Common Ground Taxonomy, let me give you a couple of examples. One is the Chinese have been using that already in raising money internationally. For example, all major Chinese financial firms since 2022, when they issue green bonds internationally, they use Common Ground Taxonomy rather than using the Chinese domestic taxonomy. Once they put a sticker saying that CGT-aligned green bonds issued by Chinese, then the Europeans will buy. And in fact, subscription ratio goes up. As global investors view those aligned with CGT as high-quality green bonds, because CGT is actually stricter than the Chinese standard and stricter than the European standard. So it's even greener than the European and than the Chinese, so they love that. They see this as a lower risk of greenwashing. And therefore, more investors are willing to buy, and therefore the funding costs actually go down because of the label, because of sticker of the CGT. And then we got some other jurisdictions began to use the CGT as the reference to developing the taxonomy. And I'm using 2 examples here. One is Sri Lanka, your central bank, and the other is Hong Kong SAR. I think Eddie Yu is coming, right, for the conference in the coming few days. So Hong Kong Monetary Authority was one of the user of the CGT as well in developing the taxonomy. Many other jurisdictions are also using CGT. I'm just using these 2 economies as an example of CGT now is being used as a basis or reference for other jurisdictions to develop or modify the taxonomy. And now going forward, on the taxonomy side, I think the trend is that we're going to essentially bring in more jurisdictions. For example, the larger G20 economies such as Brazil, Australia, South Africa, Indonesia, may be in the process of joining MCGT. So if they do come, I think the MCGT will become a more popular benchmark as more and more countries are accepting it and become owner or developer of the next version of MCGT. And in that sense, the MCGT has the potential to become the global benchmark for taxonomy alignment in the future. Very much like ISSB being the international benchmark for different countries' different countries' disclosure requirements. So, Governor, maybe I'll stop here as my opening remark, and we'd love to engage in the conversation and answer some of the questions which are more relevant to your needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ma, and thank you very much, Governor. So as we conclude today's seminar, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to all of you for your participation, and we hope the insights that were shared today will support and inspire your efforts to integrate green finance standards into your respective areas of work. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Have a pleasant day.